Hey everyone, this is Mark Treichel with another episode of With Flying Colors. NCUA went from not having a lot going on publicly to having a lot going on publicly and privately from what I'm hearing through the grapevine. And today I'm recording this on December 15th. Of course, December 18th is the Thursday NCUA board meeting, and they've announced that they're going to be doing the insurance update, the quarterly briefing on the insurance fund, which is where they reveal where camels are at. So I'll be reporting on that here on the podcast down the road. And then they are also going to be talking about their budget. Lots of rumors out there about their budget and whether or not they will keep the same number of regions, whether or not they will get rid of the Office of National Exam and Supervision, whether or not they will get rid of the Office of Consumer Compliance, Office of Credit Union Expansion and Resources. All sorts of things floating around, but I think we might have some clarity on that on Thursday when the NCUA Board of One will be taking action relative to their budget. And of course, I'll have some follow-ups here to the extent it's pertinent for you listeners and viewers. But on December 2nd, Kyle Hauptman, chairman, testified before the House. And in that, he talked about he gave a hat tip to some reg relief that was coming. And then on December 10th, NCUA announced that they have a project to simplify regulations, and they dropped 4 proposed changes to clarify some regulations and to provide some regulatory relief. I'm going to walk through those 4. And then on 12/11, Kaufman said something similar about what had just been done at the FSOC annual meeting. And so things are gearing up. He testified at the House. He testified or made statements at the FSOC annual meeting. He's announced a board meeting coming later this month, as opposed to skipping a board meeting or 2. And then the 4 regulations with changes were proposed. So again, things are heating up as we wrap up the year here. Now, the project to simplify the regulations relate to 4. So the agency's stated goals of the project are to improve clarity without weakening safety and soundness, reduce compliance burden where possible, better align NCUA regulations with industry practices and statutory requirements, and make future updates faster, especially for technology-related items. The new initiative is similar to the modernization efforts the agency undertook a decade ago, but now with a renewed push driven by tech changes, cyber considerations, and the evolving supervisory environment. As part of this simplification project, NCUA issued 4 proposed rules that fit together as a package. I'm going to walk through each one of these. The first regulation is, with the proposed change, is Part 715 for the Supervisory Committee audits. NCUA's main focus here is that it proposes to update Part 715 to improve clarity around supervisory committee audits, align the regulation with industry standards, and give credit unions more flexibility in how they meet their audit requirements. The key points are that it clarifies expectations for the annual supervisory committee audit. It updates terminology and definitions to better match modern auditing practice. It simplifies the rule without changing the core statutory obligation. It reinforces that credit unions over $500 million are still required to have a CPA opinion audit. That threshold is not being touched or changed. And all the other thresholds, by the way, remain the same. Focuses on making the rule easier to follow and reducing ambiguity for committees, examiners, and CPAs. It also supports NCUA's goal of making rules easier to understand, easier to comply with, and easier to examine. Those are the proposed improvement areas. What it really means for credit unions: minimal operational change, but improved clarity, fewer exam surprises because expectations theoretically are spelled out more plainly. And supervisory committee, of course, should review their policies to ensure their alignment with the updated language once the rule is finalized. Again, this is just a proposal. Has to be voted on separately, likely by notation vote under the current structure, a final rule, and that's what you have to deal with, the changes that relate to it. Now, for corporate credit unions, there's not a lot of them, 11 or 12 corporate credit unions left. The main focus is targeting updates to corporate rules to reduce outdated requirements and strengthen governance expectations. The key points are: it highlights and clarifies certain board governance provisions. It updates reporting requirements to reflect current practice. It removes outdated cross-references and cleans up legacy language from pre-crisis regulations. Pre-crisis regulations refers to the Great Recession and the NCUA having to issue the NGN bond program back in the day when all the AAA rated securities turned into junk, and NCUA had to figure out a way to hold those so that credit unions' losses could be normalized and reduced. That's what there were regulation changes made to back then that they felt they could pull out to simplify. It also aligns more closely with standardized governance frameworks, for example, not requiring a board member to sit on committees, and it's intended as part of ongoing corporate rule maintenance, not a broad rewrite. What this means for corporate credit unions, mostly technical and clarifying updates. Some governance responsibilities may be spelled out more explicitly, like those, the change of who can be on committees, and no new major operational requirements, but clarity improves compliance and consistency across the corporates. Number 3, safeguarding member information. Main idea, Appendix A to Part 748, the safeguarding of member information guidelines is being removed from the regulation and reissued as guidance via a letter to credit union. It's funny that the regulation says it's a guideline, but it's a regulation, so this makes perfect sense. Guidelines are guidelines, shouldn't be in a regulation. So it was key points. Appendix A was always intended as guidance under the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, not a regulation. Keeping guidance inside the CFR blurs the line between what's required and what's advisory. And moving it to a letter of credit unions makes updates faster and clearer. Why is that? Typically, it's faster to do a letter to credit unions because it doesn't go up for public comment, and it can be sent out with the signature of the NCUA chairman. In this instance right now, the chairman is the full board. So while you can argue that under a one board member scenario, it's not any quicker, under reality, guidance is much quicker. I had actually done podcasts and posts about why I thought that succession planning should be done by guidance and not regulation, because it bakes it in and it makes it harder to change. And actually, I believe that's what Todd Harper's intent was, to make it harder to change. He wanted it baked in, and in some instances, doing things by guidance makes much more sense. And I think in this instance, NCUA has hit a home run on this proposal. So it also eliminates any confusion, but does not change the requirement for each credit union to have a written security program. So they still need to have a written security program, and it eliminates confusion on whether or not that's required or not. What this also means for credit unions, there's really no substantive cybersecurity requirement being removed. So cybersecurity, as per usual, which means you throw a lot of money at it and hope that you don't get hacked. Number 2, your security program must still meet the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act expectations. And this move, again, is just purely structural. Guidance belongs in letters and not in the regulatory code. Lastly, response programs for unauthorized access removal from Appendix B. Similar to Appendix A, Appendix B, which outlines expectations for response programs to unauthorized access, is also being removed from regulation and republished as guidance. Again, housekeeping, aligning with the CFR with how guidance is supposed to work. The content's not going away. It's being placed in different formats, in letters to credit unions. It's important because technology and cyber responses expectations change frequently, which make it easier to put this out in a letter to credit unions as opposed to a regulation, makes it more nimble. So again, you need to comply. You must have an incident response program. You must notify NCUA when there's a significant cyber incident. But the day-to-day expectations haven't changed. They'll be put into a letter to credit unions, and then ultimately updates when there are changes. You'll see them theoretically in letters to credit unions as opposed to into a regulation. This is a first step towards NCUA making some minor tweaks to the regulations. And I did some posts on LinkedIn, did some emails to my mailing list. If you're not on my mailing list and you'd like to get on the mailing list, send me a message on LinkedIn. A lot coming this week. NCUA's board meeting on Thursday. I believe that they should make some announcements about offices that are closing. I believe they will say the large credit union program and the corporate credit union will be pushed into the regions. I believe they may make some structural changes as to how many regions and or regional directors are out there. but that's just chatter amongst through the grapevine, if you will. After NCUA's board of one meets on Thursday, I will be listening to that via the YouTube live feed that they do, which is great. And I will have a podcast about that coming up. We also have a podcast with my team, Steve, Todd, and Dennis, on the quarterly data that came out from NCUA, comparing that to some of the banking data and what we see that meaning potentially for credit unions. Also, I hope to do a summary of 2025 on the podcast episode coming up here between now and the end of the year. And I've got some exciting guests planned for January and or later this year as well. As we come to a wrap here in 2025, as always, and as a wrap on this podcast episode, I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This is Mark Treichel signing off with flying colors.